Good morning. Good morning and good morning. Good morning, sunshines. Good morning, YouTube. Good morning, universe. Hey, y'all. Hey, I missed y'all. Y'all, life is lifing for me, and I can't even explain what I'm very thankful. I'm very blessed. Well, I've always been blessed my entire, like, even the good, the bad, the ugly, all of the things make me me. But y'all, right now, at this present moment in life, I knew I was magical, but I have other people that are magical with me, and it is amazing. I've had personal friends. I have personal friends that are magical too. But like at work, to see so many magical people in the same place, oh, it's just been so much. But it is a mess. My brain is a listen. Anyway, I would like to thank everybody for being here. If you have not subscribed, you probably can't talk to me right now. One of the things that I do is put it on subscribers only mode because my mods be busy, girl. You know what I'm saying? I got a little bitty channel and I don't be needing that many mods and I don't be doing nothing over here, but talking to the people and doing the things. But if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Please like it. Please share it. And leave a comment. If you're not here live, please leave a comment later on. At the bare minimum, I will love it. Sometimes I can respond, but I can't all the time. But I do get the notifications and I try to immediately love your comments so that you know I care about you and I thank you and appreciate you for just tuning in. If it's for a long time or a little time. Good morning, do the right thing. Good morning, and good morning. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Hey, boo, what's going on, Foxy? You on your way to work? You at your desk? Okay, girl. That ride is pretty, girl. I gotta come take a tour in it. I've been missing you, but girl, it is beautiful. You go, Foxy. You go. All right, y'all. So I finished at 3 of the books. My mindfulness summer of 22 of the big 50 with you guys. We had the devotions. We did 50 devotions and I cut those up and I posted those for 50 days. They are all on my channel under the playlist of Drinks and Journals as well as the Elevation Station. We read Dr. Edie's book. He helped us learn more about how to eat to live a long and fruitful and healthier life. I also was able to finish the mindfulness walking, which we know correlates to just mindfulness in general about living and being a part of this time and space that we currently reside in. And then I have 2 books that I wasn't able to finish with you guys. And I am going to use my weekends sometimes. I thought I was going to go live last weekend, but I was tired. I was overwhelmed last weekend. I was overwhelmed this week, but today I don't feel as overwhelmed. So I was able to keep this live as I had it scheduled. So today and tomorrow, God willing, we have 3 more chapters in this book from John Lewis, Across That Bridge. So today we are going to read about peace. It is a lengthy read. I am going to do my best to just stay focused. When I read into John Lewis's book, I do get off track from time to time because it is political and I have my own political opinions that I often try to keep off of the YouTube streets, but it's hard because the book it's about, just life in general and mindfulness, but it is about politics. It's about the civil rights movement. It's about us as Black people and how that intersection occurs in politics. And again, election season is upon us in the United States of America. We have elections coming up. If you guys are not registered to vote, if you have not been voting, please, Please take some time, read about these candidates, read about these proposals, and vote. I don't care who you vote for. Honestly, I do not. Just vote. Your voice is important in our democracy. And every day they are trying to do things to take that away from you. So fight for the right to vote. Our ancestors did, and they deserve nothing less than for their legacy to stand tall, especially in the year of 2022 when they're doing everything to keep and to continually strip away our rights. All right, I'm going to get into it. Peace. Peace is softening what is rigid in our hearts. We can talk about ending war and we can march for ending war. We can do everything in our power, but war is never going to end as long as our hearts are hardened against each other. This is a quote from Pema Chandran, Practicing Peace in Times of War. We are emerging from what some historians have termed the violent century. Several researchers have declared the last 100 years to be the bloodiest period in contemporary history. In May of 2010, Economist magazine featured a cover story on a phenomenon it called gendercide in Asian countries like China and India, involving the killing of at least 100 million baby girls due to the cultural belief that they are less valuable than boys. Close to 33 million soldiers were killed in the wars of the 20th century. 54 million civilians were killed in conflict zones, and estimates are that between 80 million and 170 million people were murdered, M-worded, because of political oppression, intentional famine, and government inflicted deaths. Some writers have dubbed the times we now live in as the age of hate. And based on what I see on YouTube, I would have to agree. But let's carry on. We think of ourselves as more enlightened, more developed than the primitive peoples our civilizations have supplanted. Yet, in all our advancement, we are responsible for more death, more suffering, more murder, and mayhem than any period in recorded history. What does this say about the extent of human progress? How has our enlightenment failed to repudiate the transgression of violence? Recently, I had an opportunity to visit Germany, where I saw with my own eyes a solemn memorial to more than 6 million Jews who were slaughtered in Europe. I kept saying to myself as I walked through the horrible ruins of this crime, how did this happen? How could something like this have actually taken place? And how is it that today, 65 years after such a tragedy, we are seemingly more immune to the devastation of killing, violence, and war? As I have reflected on my life and the intimate exposure I have had to the atrocities of hate, I conclude that the question is not who, but what. What is it about our psyche or makeup as human beings that invites us to project our fear upon one another, justify abuse to relieve our own anxieties, and then demonize the object of our ridicule? It is so strange to me that we have learned to fly in the air like birds, learned to swim in the ocean like fish, shoot a rocket to the moon, but we have not yet learned how to live together in harmony with one another. I will insert here. We have not yet learned to peacefully coexist on YouTube with one another. I haven't been live probably in 2 weeks. I get to tune in, I catch replays from time to time. The way that some of these content creators literally use each other for content, the way these content creators verbally crucify each other, they bring in family members and like, how do we get here? Why are we like this? And why is this now entertainment for the enjoyment of the entire world. It is so disheartening and it is so sad to see. Back to the book. As we look toward the unfolding of the next century, we must reflect on our legacy as a world community. Though we have bridged some of the troubled waters in the human experience that brought an end to apartheid in South Africa, the fall of the Soviet Union, and the end of the hostilities in Northern Ireland, we must admit that we have dedicated a significant part of the past 100 years, either intentionally or unwittingly, to perpetrating devastation and war. All of this correlates in my mind to the behaviors that I witness on YouTube. Whether it's intentional or unintentional, there is a war going on, and it is so sad to see, and it's so unnecessary. YouTube is big enough for everybody. YouTube is big enough for people to sit up here and talk about nothing and talk about everything and stay in whatever lane they choose to be in instead of talking about each other. Like, I just, my heart is just sad. I have been so saddened this summer by the behaviors that I witnessed. Back to the book. Stay focused, girl. Stay focused. We have even redefined the notion of international peacekeeping to actually mean a show of military strength. And where has this irony taken us? Certainly not into a safer world. The creation of the nuclear bomb has only resulted in the proliferation of more bombs. Its deployment as a peacekeeping measure did not end terror. I've seen some YouTube content creators who claim that they were here to broker peace on YouTube, and yet they find themselves in the midst of the mess on YouTube, creating more terror on YouTube and horror. It heightened the threat of worldwide disaster. Its looming repercussions have been emerged as the unwitting and monstrous complication of natural cataclysm, as the impacts of nuclear reactor explosions in the aftermath of the 2011 tsunami in northern Japan still haunt us to this day. Thus, our greatest fear now is that we will be victimized by the very technology and weapons we ourselves have created and attacked by the very people we trained in the methods and science of violence. That's what happens when the child. I'm trying to be quiet. Let me be quiet and read my book. Excuse me for a moment. If y'all haven't had y'all coffee or water or tea, take a moment and have a sip of water. It's good for your soul. Get you some fruit. It's good for your body and mind. And make sure you eat some vegetables later today. This reminds me of a speech Martin Luther King Jr. delivered, his greatest ever in my estimation. He was at Riverside Baptist Church exactly 1 year before his assassination on April the 4th, 1967, asking us to consider the spiritual cost of our promotion of death as a resolution to human conflict. Let me read this again. He asked us to consider the spiritual cost. Have you guys ever thought about the spiritual costs of your promotion of anything? He asked us to consider the spiritual cost of our promotion of death as a resolution to human conflict. Have you thought about the spiritual cost of your promotion of degrading other human beings on YouTube as a resolution to YouTube conflict? Have you? Because please believe, all of that vitriol, all of that reading and terrorizing that you're doing to other people, other human beings, whether they have a voice or actual human presence, the universe hears you. The universe will deliver to you what you put into it. Be mindful of the energy that you surround yourself with. Please be mindful of the energy that you project because you will attract that energy back to you. Have you considered the spiritual cost of your promotion of anything as a resolution to whatever you're trying to resolve in your life, on YouTube, at work? Have you considered what price you are going to pay as you try to make people pay a price for however you feel about however they move on YouTube, on life, in these streets? This is all a boomerang effect. Energy comes back. You can call it karma. You can call it whatever you want, but it's coming back to you. Please protect your energy. He talked about his difficulty as a minister to represent the need for peace to young boys engaged in gang violence in the ghettos of the North. While he was urging them to cast aside the tools of violence, they were shooting back these words, But what about the war in Vietnam? And today we could add Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, and Libya to the list. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. Martin Luther King Jr. We see today's gangbangers as abstractions of ourselves, lurid depictions of the dangers of city streets. But have we ever considered these children might mirror some aspect of our own reflection? That's what I'm trying to tell y'all. Be mindful. Could it be that these young, impressionable souls, many casting about what many casting without the anchor of reasonable adult guidance may be feeling their need for direction with all the noise that surrounds them, all the noise that surrounds them, the noise that surrounds you, the confusion that you like to keep up, the drama that you say you don't want to be involved in, but you continuously find yourself engaged in? Could they be losing their psychic innocence as they wade unprotected in streams of murky spiritual water, only to find their resting place in the seeming sewers of American life? We think the worst of them, do we not? We offer them the worst options this nation creates, do we not? And do we think it is an accident that they act out the worst in us at ever younger ages? Could it be that through them, we are getting what we give? Individuals and groups must judge themselves to determine whether they have abandoned any of their own responsibility. But the question for us as a society is whether we participate in any way in the corruption of the defenseless, the undereducated, and the poor in spirit. We may not be able to stop the violence of others, but we can stop our own. A child is born in innocence, and this violence does not emerge out of thin air. It is created, fomented, and nurtured in them to their detriment. King said, "We are all linked in a web of mutuality, and what affects one of us affects us all." We are all. Nobody is better or lower or greater than anybody else. We are all linked in a web of mutuality. And what affects one of us affects all of us. This model applies to all that we are, not only the best within us, but also the worst. That is the true value of transparency. It acknowledges that what is done in secret, even at the highest, most secure levels, can travel across the membrane of a unified human consciousness and be discovered. It can also invade and infect the weak minded and the most vulnerable. That is why the first act of peace is to silence the war raging within. And once we are still inside, we have a greater capacity to assist others who are struggling with the conditions of violence. It is a coincidence. I'm sorry. Is it a coincidence that we have actively participated in this century of violence while our city streets are riddled with gun violence and gang war? Is it by accident that we have intruded on the lush green forests of the desert sands of foreign lands, spreading the intelligence of militarism while the serenity of our countryside is complicated by crystal meth and crack cocaine? In King's speech, he cited the words of a Buddhist priest who marveled at our focus on the possibilities of military victory without recognizing the deep psychological and political defeat we incur in the minds and hearts of the people we defend and those we are working to subdue. We are reminded of this truth daily through the bitterness and turmoil we unleashed in Iraq, Afghanistan, and the constant unrest in parts of Africa and Latin America where proceeds of war play out their ugly conclusion. We are one people, one human family, and the actions of one of us affect all of us. We are one people, one human family, and the actions of one of us affects all of us. Let that breathe. Let that sink in. Though our legacy proves violence may provide a short-term delay in hostilities, we emerge from the work of killing with questions about the true nature of honor, nightmares of mayhem, and a corrupted sense of right and wrong. The struggle does not lend itself to an evolved understanding of the power of faith, of truth, of peace. If anything, we are left mourning our virtue, thirsting for truth and longing for peace. And what we have gained is a more precise, more horrific understanding of the capacity to destroy. These are not the values that sustain civilization, but the ones that corrode them at the core. If we were to analyze the efficacy of all the wars we have waged in this country as a precursor to peace, then logically the world would be more peaceful than ever before. Why is the opposite true? Why is it that this is me outside of the book, y'all, because I'm just thinking out loud. Why is it that people who claim to want peace on YouTube are the ones that have not taken up what do they call that, doxing and reading and vilifying? And now the new thing, like I didn't even know people were doing this until this summer. People actually just record people's whole lives, or this whole DM situation. I don't do DMs at all. I find DMs to be pretty toxic and unnecessary. I prefer to really I like emails, and I don't like links on emails. I don't like videos in emails. Videos and DMs are absolutely not good. But listen, y'all, how are these supposed gatekeepers of truth and honesty becoming the things that they say they hate? It has been the most interesting summer. I just didn't know human behavior could be so contrary. I work with children. I'm watching this behavior from grown up people Grown up human beings are on YouTube doing terrible things and saying terrible things about other grown people. I see it in high school behaviors. I see it in elementary and middle school behaviors. But these behaviors on YouTube are next level. Like, I'm confusion. Back to the book. We constantly ask, how can we effectively thwart a threatening adversary with the posture of peace? But this power has been demonstrated on our own shores, yet its guidance remains invisible to us. The philosophy of nonviolence is studied and revered around the world, yet we fail to see the avenues it opens to us here at home. It was a gateway to the Arab Spring, to nonviolent change in Serbia and Poland, in Germany and South Africa. Why don't we recognize the power of what we accomplished here at home? If we can use light to heal and light to see, why not use light to secure ourselves against darkness? If we take the time, we can understand that the philosophy and strategies of nonviolence were a kind of genius that enabled even the undefended to fight back without the black arts of destruction. It taught an entire generation how to stand up without compromising their spiritual integrity, and how to reform the most powerful nation on earth using methods that heal the human soul and uplift human society. If we can research the avenues of war, then we can also develop and mechanize the products of peace. President Eisenhower warned us decades ago against feeding the enormous appetite of the military industrial complex. And since that time, we have disregarded the admonition of a president and a general and proceeded to revolve our entire economy around the industries of war. If we are ever to heed Eisenhower's advice, it will mean cooperation and collaboration between nations in efforts that finally admit this world is not ours to hoard or to waste, but it can only be ours in future generations if we share it equitably among one another. That is the only way each of us can survive and thrive. We must use what we need and then protect what remains for the betterment of future generations. This shift in priorities does not mean demonizing industry or defaming profit. Even Gandhi saw business as an aid to human advancement and profit as a powerful incentive to create. We cannot go about shutting down the innovations of others. That too is a form of violence. But we must work together to creatively transform industry to reflect a reverence for the earth, the development of sustainable, renewable manufacturing processes, and a respect for human dignity across the globe. Instead of an economy based on the buildup of conflict, we must pursue an economic center based on the enduring power of peace. That translates to YouTube behavior. People get subscribers off of drama. They build their channels off of drama. The problem is, if they try to get away from the drama, then they don't get the clicks and the views that they've become accustomed to. And the sadder thing is that the subscribers are literally only subscribing because of the drama. There is a part of our human psyche that is enthralled and in love with drama. People say this seems too simplistic, too unaware of treaties and contracts, history and culture, which all create a tangle of imperatives too complex to unravel. But if we want change, we have to determine to be different. We cannot use the same excuses as before. Once we step outside of our belief in the need for violence and mandate the way of peace, we will discover pathways we have never tried, personally, locally, nationally, and internationally. There are technologies of peace. There are research and methodologies of peace. There are intelligence and industries of peace. They exist. We simply have to decide to explore them. The 2010 rescue of coal miners in Chile. I'm so used to YouTube talk, child. Chile. Trapped beneath the earth taught us a powerful lesson. Once we decide collateral damage to any form of life is not an acceptable outcome, it is not hard to devise means and mechanisms to preserve life rather than cast it away as though it is expendable. We already know the way. We just have to exercise the will. As a young boy, I was determined to go to school because I saw education as the only way out. I remember the first time I ever visited Tuskegee Institute, the school founded by Booker T. Washington, a former slave who became an advisor to presidents. I remember hearing about one of its famous professors, George Washington Carver, a scientist and inventor who revolutionized agriculture and industrial uses of the peanut. The presidents of Tuskegee were held in extremely high regard in our community. And when people talked about Frederick Patterson or Luther Foster, they seemed to stand up a little taller and speak a little bit more precisely. To this day, I still feel so proud when I am driving back home to Troy. I get off Highway 85 after traveling more than 100 miles from Atlanta into Alabama, exit onto Route 29, and within minutes, I am rolling by the campus of Tuskegee Institute. I have visited many college campuses in the four corners of this country and in the heart of the Midwest. The campuses of the Big Ten, the Ivy League, and small picturesque universities in idyllic settings around the nation. To me, there is no campus as beautiful as Tuskegee. I would have to disagree. There's no campus as beautiful as Hampton University. I just digress because I am a product of Hampton University. And when I saw Hampton my senior year of high school, I knew that's where I had to go. I just knew it. Like it was just the most beautiful place I had ever seen. Its wide green lawns are gorgeously maintained, inlaid with red brick buildings, some original, some contemporary. I will never forget the first time I laid eyes on that scene. I was in the third grade, and it was my first field trip outside of Pike County. Tuskegee was like an emerald city. It represented everything I felt that education could do. It could bestow a grace, honor, and intelligence in life that I glimpsed even at that early age, but realized was being actively withheld from me. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Nelson Mandela. Sometimes when I was needed in the fields to help my parents pick cotton, peanuts, or corn, I would get up very early. I would get dressed and then hide under the front porch until the school bus stopped at my house. Then I would hop on the bus without my parents knowing. They were always angry when they discovered I was gone, as most parents would be, but they never punished me for going to school. We were all victims of the narrow limitations our society had prescribed for us. They were trapped too, between a rock and a hard place, and that required them to pit their survival as sharecroppers against the education of their children. As a child, I was restless to escape the boundaries that had been set for me. My soul was calling me to do something, to take some kind of action, to burst the seams of this agricultural captivity. It was protesting, loudly declaring that I was greater than the confinement I was being forced into. I was struggling against this reality the only way I could, like a bird in a cage that has had a chance to see the sky. And I was not alone. Most of us were frustrated by the truncated quality of our lives, but we had no idea how to change it. My parents' strategy was to work within the strictures set for them, and they succeeded in ways that elude many of us today. My father bought 300 acres of land by scrimping and saving a measly, unfair salary. On that land set a larger home for his family, a chance for some margin of independence. He raised 9 children who all became responsible citizens. Others shook the dust off their feet and left the South to live in New York, Chicago, Washington, Los Angeles, and other cities, only to find bondage of another kind. If you were lucky or your parents had enough resources, a college education could open some doors. It did not mean you were free of the limitations of racial bias, but it gave you more options in a limited field to accomplish great things, like the men of Tuskegee I had heard so much about. And then there were always a few who simply gave up and gave in to anything that would help them forget the odds against them. These were my options. We had no money for college. Leaving my family was out of the question. And until I got much older and working in the fields for a lifetime seemed like a form of punishment to me. You cannot imagine the sense of awe, the sense of relief I felt when I heard the voice of a young Southern minister, not too much older than me, who was openly discussing the injustice that no one dared to address. He told us it was our Christian duty to take a stand against problems in our society. Martin Luther King Jr.'s words were the blue sky this restless bird needed to fly. They were the candle illuminating a darkness threatening to swallow us all up. And they lit a path to a clearing where we could stand up and be the men and women we were born to be. We realized that the violence all around us offered an uncommon opportunity to perform a great spiritual work. We began as outcasts reserved for condemnation and scorn, but we were transformed into a shiny army of peace moving in the center of God's love. We were rescued from the outer limits of human existence to become philosophers and priests, leaders and advocates, shepherds and witnesses to the way of truth. And in these new roles, we cut a path to a new America. We discovered that our dignity, and in fact, all human dignity, was not tied to the way we looked or how we dressed. Our dignity was not related to the size of our wallet or the digits in our zip code. We discovered that it did not matter how we were judged by mankind. Y'all, it does not matter what people say about you on YouTube. Our own souls were imbued with the power to work miracles, to change water into wine, the meek into the mighty, to change base metal into pure gold. Each and every one of you, each and every one of us are pure gold. Don't let anybody make you feel like you're copper or tin or silver. You are platinum. You are a product of the Most High. Don't let somebody else's stinking thinking make you respond. Excuse me. Don't let somebody else's word vomit make you react. You hold your head high because you know who and whose you are. Take away anybody's ability to move you off your square. Unplug. Unplug. Get back into the real world where I pray your life is better than what it is for some of us on YouTube. Every place is toxic. You can find the good and the bad anywhere. If you choose to stay in negative spaces, that is what you will reap. That is what you are sowing, and that is what you will reap. There are positive places and uplifting places in society as well as on YouTube. We have the ability to not watch, to not listen, and to not respond. Please, y'all, I'm praying that for y'all. Just live in peace. Back to the book. In the South, we knew our adversary would stop at nothing to silence our activism. We knew we could never match his readiness to annihilate our resistance. So we ceded him that ground and challenged him instead to defend himself against the work of loving peace. Our simplicity outwitted his complex system of rules and regulations. Our quiet insistence exposed his comfort with brutality. Our numbers robbed him of an ability to minimize our opposition. As our singing rejuvenated our spirits, it left him seething in frustration. We learned that we could be warriors of peace who rejected the short victories of destruction for struggles that made us victors in this world and the next. Our peace exposed the moral condemnation of violence, and it brought a nation to its knees. Despite our desire to do no harm, there are still casualties in a conflict fought with the weapons of peace. But the human cost and the spiritual toll does not begin to compare with the deficit of war. Too few talk about walking wounded of the movement. Carolyn McKinstry, who also just a little girl who had just passed the bathroom where four girls, her friends, were killed by a bomb that went off after Sunday school in Birmingham. That day defined her life. She said she spent 20 years moving through a career, marriage, and family, suppressing the pain of that day. In her retirement, she became a minister, and today she shares the story of what she experienced to heal the hurt and to hopefully ease the tensions of today's flirtation with racial violence and separatism. And there was another poignant survivor that day. So few people realized there were actually five girls in the bathroom. The four girls who died are very well known, but one, Sarah Collins Cox, the sister of one of the four who was killed, survived. When I hear her speak today about the incident in that same sanctuary of the First Baptist Church in Birmingham, her voice is haunting. She had been washing her hands at the face bowl on the opposite side of the bathroom when her sister asked her to help tie the sash of her dress. She looked back in her sister's direction, and before she could move toward her, the bomb exploded. Shards of glass tore through her eye. She climbed through a hole in the wall to the street and was bleeding from her nose and ears. Today she is blind in that eye and is facing the possibility of blindness in the other. There is no anger in her voice. Her soft, wistful words acknowledging nothing of her struggle. But I hear the legacy of pain when she says decades later, I never knew whether she ever got to tie her sash. Oh, yes, there are casualties of nonviolent struggle, but they are far fewer than in a violent war. And the casualties are suffered on the side that has prepared to bear the blows in peace. I don't think I ever heard that any of our offenders suffer a single physical loss. And that is as it should be, because the real battleground is on a higher ground, in the heart and in the mind, where love and truth will be the final victors. And it is not because of protest, but because of this struggle of conscious, that the consciousness of this nation has been transformed. We were soldiers of a nonviolent revolution, a revolution under the rule of law, a revolution of values, a revolution of ideas that changed America forever. But we carry few scars from the battle of peace because we never violated one human being in our conflict. If you are a content creator and you feel like you're always in some mess and you never take accountability and the mess never ends, you are violent. You are leaving marks on the psyche and the souls and the universe. The peacekeepers, the true peacekeepers. But we carry few scars from the battle of peace because we never violated one human being in our conflict. If you can't say that, you're violent. You're verbally violent. You're emotionally violent. You're psychologically violent. That's what is taking place on YouTube. Violence. The believers in peace never raised one finger in anger. We never wounded another human soul. We did not even bruise the ground we stood on to bring this transformation forward. Some of us still struggle with psychological turmoil after wading through the breathing fire of hate. Flashbacks of images burned in our minds of the twisted, jeering mouths and the hands that were harmed still leave some of my colleagues in a cold sweat. But these horrors were not compounded by the damage of war. And even these difficulties can be healed by the values of nonviolent struggle. Those walking wounded still have the ready philosophy of love and forgiveness to heal any injury that lingers. Instead of thousands of college-age soldiers who lose their limbs and their youth in a crisscross of gunfire, only a few of our soldiers were wounded and even fewer were killed. The warriors of peace live to profit from the new openness their courage ushered in. A few suffered, struggled, and died so that millions could find their way towards peace. How many deaths will it take? How many verbal crucifixions on YouTube will it take? How many videos need to be created to build your army of hate against 1, 2, 10, 20 other content creators? How many deaths will it take? How much war must we visit upon ourselves before we recognize that war does not work? War is bloody. War is messy. It not only tends to hide the truth, because that's what y'all claim y'all want, but it sacrifices the truth. War postpones the unalterable need to reconcile our actions to our knowledge of the truth, whether they are the actions of nations or of single individuals or content creators or your family or your friends. How long are you going to keep going back and forth, forth and back, front and back, side to side? How long are you going to be in this war of words, of visual effects? How many deaths will this take? Aren't you tired of fighting There's no peace and joy. There's no fun to be had on YouTube because there's a constant war within everybody. And then everybody's teams are switching up, and these people don't like each other, but today they do because they don't like that other. Like, y'all, war that is waged for the power or dominion over other human beings obscures the inevitable truth that we are all members of one family. And no matter who has conquered whom, who now resents who holds bitterness against whom, the only way we can have true peace is to set aside our injuries and our dedication to revenge and accept our equal divinity. Martin Luther King Jr. said that peace is not the absence of tension, but the presence of justice that brings peace. It is justice that brings peace, even in the midst of struggle. To most of us, peace is a noble idea, a worthy goal of human endeavor. Who would argue that our world would be vibrating at a much higher level if we were to find a way to end violence and war in the Middle East, to eliminate ethnic cleansing in the Sudan, to stop conflict, rape in the Congo, to end the drug wars in Colombia and Mexico? Yet somehow, though we all would say we want peace, in our own lives and in our own world, we view it as a distant star, something we say we seek, but never really expect to gain. Gandhi would tell us there is no way to peace. Peace is the way. If we are ever to be the same leaders in the work of cooperation as we are in the work of domination, we will have to face the truth about ourselves, about our lives, and about our legacy as a nation. Nonviolence is confrontational. It is not silent in the face of injustice, but creatively maladjusted to the problems and conditions of this world. If you truly want peace, you cannot be satisfied, apathetic, or compliant with the hypocrisy of the status quo. You must follow where the truth leads, because at the end of that road lies the cessation of struggle, true peace. This means refusing to deny or resist what our souls insist is true and serenely acquiescing to the goodness of what is truly real. Once we accept the truth that is aligned with the order of the universe, all conflict will cease. And until we accept the truth, we will writhe in pain of resistance to what will be. Until we see truth manifested in our world and in our way of life, we must confront injustice with the power of peace to clear and cleanse violence, anger, and animosity from the human condition. Sometimes we have to be willing to turn things upside down to make them right side up. This reminds me of an elderly woman named Mother Pollard, who was asked to share her feelings during the height of the Montgomery bus boycott. The boycott lasted over a year, and it required her and many others to walk long distances to work. She was old, and she may have been tired, but she said something like, "My feet are weary, but my soul is at rest." And in her 70 or 80 years, she had never seen more turmoil around her, never seen more controversy, rumor, and commotion than during the boycott. But her silence in the face of injustice disturbed her more than any upheaval the boycott could ever have created. All those years riding that bus, she was sitting down. She was still, but she was not at peace. The boycott turned things upside down for but for old Mother Pollard, they had been made right side up. Her feet were weary, but her soul was finally at rest. The way of peace and nonviolence is not the way of the weak. It takes courage to face the truth of your condition or the condition of our society. It takes courage to admit that we are not living up to our ideas of freedom and justice as a people. It takes courage to admit that we participate in killing, violence, and hate around the world. And once you face the truth, it is difficult to retreat back into a state of unconsciousness. Becoming aware of the truth requires action, and that is when the struggle begins. Excuse me for 1 second. Struggle is the act of making things right. It is an effort to encourage change in the affairs of humanity or the affairs of one's daily life so they will conform to a new awareness of the truth. And that struggle is an expression of the inner dissonance a person experiences within his or her own mind and heart, a continuing disturbance that will not cease until the circumstances have been corrected. The stress associated with this disquietude was alluded to by Mother Pollard, who found her only peace inside the turmoil of struggle. Why? Because she was finally able to take some steps to correct the wrong she had been required to participate in almost her entire life. The struggles of humanity will not be corrected in a day, a week, a year, or even a generation. Those of us who are active participants in the struggle must recognize that we are part of a long line of activists who have come before. Some stand next to us in the struggles of our time, shoulder to shoulder partners in the midst of conflict. And there are others who must follow after us in order to finally overcome violence with peace in human affairs. Where will we stand in this continuum of struggle? Each individual participates in this conflict, whether he or she is actively or passively engaged. The divine spark that is resident in each of us challenges us to be the light and stand up for what is right. We can decide whether to obey the call of the Spirit or abide in denial, confusion, or hostility to the truth. But once we have heard the voice calling us to act, we cannot rest until we do something. And it is when we find the courage to act on that calling that we can finally begin to find peace. If you want to make peace with your enemy, you have to work with your enemy. Then he becomes your partner. Nelson Mandela. Many have asked me whether I was afraid when I was standing on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, looking out at a sea of Alabama state troopers. They, excuse me. They seem bewildered when I tell them I was not afraid. I was at peace. It did not matter that I was looking down the barrel of a gun or an army of guns. It did not matter that troopers were on the horseback, ready to fire tear gas. It did not matter that citizens had been deputized and were carrying every weapon they could find. I had long before accepted that I might die in a protest. And when I saw those troopers, I realized my time might be coming to an end. But that was all right with me because I knew deep within my heart that I was living the life I was meant to lead, and I was willing to follow that calling wherever it took me. If I had to die, I believe my sacrifice, along with the sacrifice of others, would mean something. I had made peace with the understanding that if I died on that bridge, I would have offered my life in contribution to an effort that was larger than myself. My life and my death would have served a divine purpose to liberate a people and maybe even a nation. I could think of no greater gift I could give to humanity. My soul was at peace with whatever the outcome might be. I had faced the truth of my circumstances. I made a choice not to abide in the deep disturbance of a silent, segregated South, but to find peace in the midst of a mighty wind that turned things upside down to make them right side up. As I was working on this book, I realized the condition of humanity at this time led me to speak more about the need for peace than peace itself. I challenged myself to find a moment when I witnessed the peace that I hope to see in the world today. I always marvel at the progress we have made in the South that has encouraged so many people to return. The fear that hung heavy in the air is gone, and people move much more freely today than in the days of my childhood. That is not to say the struggle is over in the South. It is definitely not. There is still discrimination and injustice in the South and across this nation, which must be addressed. But those of us who lived through the 40s and 50s in America know we have come a long way. I can say I have witnessed the advent of greater peace in our society, but that is in comparison to all the turmoil I have seen. I wanted to find a moment in contemporary history that others with different experiences might be able to point to, a place where the tension and strife in our society had ceased, even temporarily. I looked for one moment that we may all remember, a moment that expands beyond politics or partisanship, but express the ability of a nation to heal. For me, the nomination of Barack Obama as a candidate for president and his inauguration in Washington represents a brief glimpse at the power and potential of peace. I agree with that. When I was in school working on my education degree, I was in a class, a social studies class, and I had a Black professor, and he told us the requirements to become president. There's an age requirement. You have to be born a United States citizen. There's nothing about race, though. And then he had a timeline of all the presidents. There was a visual timeline across the wall. And he said, whether this is written or not, what do you see? And all you saw were white men. He said there is an unwritten requirement to become the president of the United States that you have to be a white man. And visually, until we saw Barack Obama, that was true. So I agree. Whether you liked him or not, just as a human being, the nomination and the inauguration of Barack Obama is a brief glimpse at the power and the potential of peace. There was a radiance about America then, a great coming together of so many people, races, generations, and beliefs. For one brief moment in our history, we found a way to put down our strife against one another. For a few days, weeks, and months, all the false reasons we use daily to look down on others, to separate ourselves from one another, fell away. And we opened our hearts to the kind of equality that our founders envisioned, but did not have the courage to create. In that moment, we decided to face the truth of our oneness with one another. And when we did, we experienced the beauty of peace. The night of Obama's nomination at the Democratic National Convention felt like what we would have called a happening in the 60s. Our jubilation moved beyond the pride of a political win. I had never seen anything like it in all the political conventions I have ever attended. There was a great feeling of release, like we were glad as a nation that we had finally done it. It was one moment in our long history where we sensed the possibility of liberation from all the pain and struggle of hundreds of years. It was as though the hearts of the people in a nation were ringing together, shouting, "Free at last, free at last." The commiserate confetti suddenly seemed so appropriate. The applause felt more authentic, and there was a lightness in the air, an ease and a comfort I have never felt at a convention before. It was only an evening, only one night in all of our history, but it reminded me so much of the way we felt in the movement, like a band of brothers and sisters who accepted the truth of our own oneness. At that moment, we were at peace with ourselves as a people and as a nation. The day of Obama's inauguration was bitterly cold, one of the coldest I have ever seen in Washington. It was below freezing, but that did not stop the people. People came from all across the country, sleeping on cots and sleeping bags on the floor in the homes of families and friends. Some of them had not seen for years. Some started walking miles away from the National Mall in Washington to be there on time. For many, it was their first visit to the capital city, and definitely the first time they ever had any desire to attend an inauguration. We all felt invested in what we had created. We felt we all had a hand in something great, in opening a door to a new day in America. Party affiliation did not matter. Race, color, and nationality did not matter. We all set our differences aside and we huddled together, warming ourselves in the generosity of one another on that very cold day. We lowered all our barriers, all our resistance, and we joined as one nation. People were sharing blankets to stay warm on the mall, helping strangers navigate the crowds, making room for people they would not normally even acknowledge. If you remember that day, if you were there or at home watching, maybe you felt it too. Maybe you felt a nation and a people who put aside their judgment of one another for one moment to share in the comfort of peace. The international community also reveled in that time, perhaps even more than we. They were with us. They abandoned their mounting anger toward us. They put aside all the damages done, and they shared our joy as a world community. I think that is why they saw fit to give President Obama the Nobel Peace Prize. That award was an indication to those who were familiar with our turmoil for over 400 years that we have finally turned a corner, that we were finally willing to lay aside the vestiges of slavery and expose ourselves to the radiant sun of real freedom. It also meant that if we could do it, maybe they could too. Maybe they could release their burden of violence and revenge. If we could do it, maybe the French and the Algerians could learn to live together. The Germans and the Turks could learn to peacefully coexist. The Italians and the Greeks could put aside their grievances. The Serbs and the Croatians could lay down their division. Maybe even Israel and Palestine could finally admit their kinship. Maybe on every continent, in every nation, in every corner of the world, people could put their long-standing grievances aside and decide to live in peace. The Nobel Committee was saying, in effect, if the United States can move beyond the tension of hundreds of years of human slavery and the bloodshed of the Civil War, then maybe, just maybe, the world community might find a way to finally lay aside the ancient struggles of the past and move to a new level of human existence. At that moment, we glimpsed a few seconds of what our future could be. We felt in this country a flash of the true joy of freedom, of living in a beloved community, living in a society based on simple justice that values the dignity and worth of every human being. There is a great deal of work left to do on the road to peace. I stand with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, who has said we have a chance today to live in contrast with the past, to bring an end to the age of violence and make the next 100 years the age of peace. It is my hope that we will turn our attention to the truth of mutual cooperation, the truth we must ultimately come to accept, as well as the healing and the compassion that will build a better world. We can do it. We must do it. Gandhi would say it is either nonviolence or non-existence. And Martin Luther King Jr. would say we must learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we will all perish as fools. I ask you to reach down inside yourself and find the truth your life is compelling you to see. That is your road to true peace. And it is the beginning of the evolution of humankind. Because every change in the world starts within. It begins with one individual who envisions his or her micro universe the way it can be and settles for nothing less. And as one individual moves towards the light ignites more individual flames, and eventually the revolutionary inner work becomes a transformative outer work that builds into a bonfire of light, the kind of light that can change the world. It starts from within, with one individual who seeks the way of peace. YouTube content creators, YouTube subscribers, YouTube moderators, I ask you, will you be that person? Reach down inside of yourself. Find the truth your life is compelling you to see. Is it worth the energy, the time, and the resources that you are putting into your behaviors on YouTube? Is it worth it? Is it what your soul is crying out for? Does that temporary pleasure you get from hurting others, does it last? Or do you have to come back and hurt some more, tear somebody else down, demean somebody else's home, looks, children, life choices, and decisions? There is no perfect person. Every time you point at somebody, there's 3 or 4 fingers pointing back at you. You are a reflection of what you put into the world. Will you be what you need? Will you be what your community needs? Will you be what your soul is yearning for? I thank you for tuning in today. I love you. And God willing, I'll be back tomorrow so that we can read about love. Have a blessed day, everybody. Take care.